Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, October 21st. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Oshwin Nunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to on this Back to the Future Day, Jill.
Roads, where we're going. You don't need any roads.
We don't need any roads. So it's Back to the Future Day because this is officially the date for the Back to the Future nerds out there when Marty and Doc go into the future, go into the past. They go into 2015, back in 85. And by 2015, they imagined that we would have flying cars. It turns out we did not have flying cars by 2015. But one prediction they did get right in that film, Jill, they thought an absurd thing would be, the Cubs finally win the World Series. Because, as of 85, they hadn't won for 70 plus years, 80 years. And they're like, in 2015 will be the year the Cubs finally win the World Series. They were only 1 year off. The Cubs finally won the World Series for the first time in 100 years in 2016. So I have to hand it to Robert Zemeckis and the whole crew at Back to the Future for coming up with that. There's a lot of absurd storylines, though, right? Like they make Marty kiss his mom back in high school in the 50s.
That's a little weird.
That was a little weird. Also, that Marty is in high
far.
School and friends with Doc, who's like sort of a crazy old professor. There's like some unexplained background. John Mulaney, the comedian, has done a whole shtick about like his questions about Back to the Future. And I think he did a very coherent job of explaining some of the issues with said film. But it's still a great movie.
I feel like Doc was just sort of this wacky neighbor. I get it, kind of.
Okay, so you're gonna give them that.
Of all of the things in Back to the Future, I feel like their friendship may not be the most unrealistic. Maybe the time machine.
But it did also, it was a great platform for Huey Lewis and the News. Some of his big hits from the 80s. The Power of Love. But I digress.
I know, it's very comforting in the morning to think about that movie and that time period. But we need to get to the headlines. A major internet outage having ripple effects across the economy. The latest as Amazon Web Services gets back up and running.
So many of you were impacted by it. You wrote in. It was effectively a snow day for humanity.
To the Middle East, Vice President J.D. Vance is headed to Israel today, where things stand with the Gaza ceasefire deal.
And to look at the state of Hamas, the vice president describing it as about 40 disjointed groups, splinter groups at this juncture. We'll walk through what that potentially means.
A big win for the Trump administration when it comes to National Guard troops in Portland. And some behind the scenes of what happened with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as he visited the White House last week. Most reportedly, there was a lot of shouting.
Par for the course, Jill, but it appears still full speed ahead on the framework for trying to achieve a deal between the Ukrainians and the Russians.
Meanwhile, the FBI looking into a possible threat against the president. The Secret Service found a platform in a tree that had a sightline to Trump's Air Force One exit area at the Palm Beach airport. What we know about it. And tragedy averted. Police say they stopped a potential mass shooter at the Atlanta airport. In health news, why peanut allergies have plummeted in children. And in the tech world, Spotify partnering with Netflix for video podcast distribution. What could be behind this partnership? And Moshe is on this day in history.
The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain, Jill, on this day in history.
Okay, starting with the story that has impacted hundreds of millions of people around the world on Monday in the form of disruptions on many popular apps and websites. Amazon Web Services, Amazon's cloud computing service, experienced an outage. Users reported disruptions on apps and websites, including social networks like Facebook, Snapchat, and Reddit. Financial sites like Venmo and Coinbase, Fidelity and Robinhood, apps like Slack, Signal, Lyft, and Canvas, and video games like Roblox, Fortnite, and League of Legends. Some passengers for United and Delta Airlines also reported issues accessing their airlines' web services, and many of Amazon's own services like Ring, Kindle, and Prime Video were also impacted. You may have also experienced an issue if you tried to listen to this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, which is another service that depends on AWS. The problem started just after 3 a.m. on the East Coast in Virginia. AWS thought it had things resolved by about 6:30 a.m. They said it was a DNS issue. DNS stands for Domain Name System. So that's a structure that helps generate IP addresses so that people with access to the internet can use apps and websites. But the problem continued. By late morning, Amazon said the company was encountering more connectivity issues affecting AWS. An internal system that helped Amazon balance its massive computing loads across the AWS network was not working, leading to outages, according to the company.
So we heard from a number of you yesterday, starting early in the morning, impacting everything from learning your work schedule. Various apps and systems utilize AWS for that. We heard from architects who couldn't use most of their software and designers. We heard from parents who were trying to work from home while their kids couldn't access Roblox. Others who couldn't look at like Life 360 to be able to track family members or kids. The Wall Street Journal website. Jill, it was just a remarkable array of apps, going to the Zooms and the Slacks. I mean, you listed a bunch of them there. It turns out that AWS, is the world's largest provider of cloud infrastructure. About a third of cloud infrastructure globally of the market is controlled by AWS. They're ahead of Microsoft and Google when it comes to that. We also learned yesterday that there's certain parts of Microsoft that depend on AWS as well. The estimated financial impact of this could be billions or tens of billions of dollars in disrupted productivity. We're talking about airports, and we're talking about factories, and we're talking about financial firms. A lot of people who just couldn't get work done yesterday. The incident here highlights the complexity and the fragility of the internet, how every aspect of what we do in our society dependent on just a handful of these large companies. And once they go down, the rest of the internet goes down with it. And so there's a lot of talk here about, what sort of redundancy measures need to be put in place here, what sort of backups can exist, especially if, it appears in this case like it was just an error. But ultimately, if there's some sort of nefarious action here, a government or some group trying to bring down, the internet for a good portion of people, well, certainly they were able to watch it unfold in real time yesterday, just how much is dependent in our society on a company like AWS. Now, we have seen outages in the past. There was a major disruption back in 2021. That impacted Disney parks and concert ticket sales. In fact, I heard from some people yesterday that Disney passes and other things they're trying to buy in Disney were also impacted. Amazon's going to continue to investigate this, create some redundancies here. But it turns out that, Jill, we are a very vulnerable bunch these days, especially once we found out that all these sites dependent on all the engineers having their ones and zeros in the right order.
I did like the idea, though, of kind of like a global snow day. It is sort of fun for a few hours. If you don't have anything really serious that you have to do, to just be like, sorry, the AWS isn't working, can't get on Slack.
Though in some cases, there were government websites dependent on this. I heard from lawyers who were trying to file certain documents by a deadline on behalf of their clients. So, real life ramifications here. For some of us, a snow day, like you're off of school today, you're off of work today, come back tomorrow. Others, understandably, very anxious about when things were going to get back up and running.
Okay, now to the Middle East. Vice President J.D. Vance arrives in Israel today looking to bolster the shaky ceasefire. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and White House advisor and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner landed in Israel on Monday. So they've already met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to talk about, quote, the developments and updates in the region. So not super specific there, Moshe. It is Witkoff and Kushner's second trip to Israel since that ceasefire deal was signed on October 9th. And this is all part of the U.S. effort to try to keep the fragile ceasefire from falling apart. As we told you yesterday, Palestinian gunmen killed 2 Israeli soldiers in Rafah. They were on the Israeli side of the ceasefire line in the Gaza Strip. Israel responded with deadly strikes across the Gaza Strip. So far, though, it does look like calm has been restored. But as we've been reporting for a while, now begins the hard part, pushing this ceasefire framework into phase 2, which would include Hamas disarming. At the same time, a Hamas delegation was meeting in Cairo on Monday with officials from Qatar and Egypt, 2 of the main countries involved with these negotiations. On the agenda, Egypt is going to be hosting an intra-Palestinian dialogue. The goal is to unify all of the differing Palestinian factions. And it comes as Hamas has been exerting its power in the Strip now that Israel has withdrawn from portions of it. They've been doing public executions of Palestinians that they view as a threat or rival militia in the Gaza Strip. On Monday, President Trump warning Hamas that it would be, quote, eradicated if it continues to violate the ceasefire and does not disarm.
We made a deal with Hamas that, they're going to be very good, they're going to behave, they're going to be nice, and if they're not, we're going to go and we're going to eradicate them if we have to. They'll be eradicated, and they know that.
Trump once again saying it's not going to be U.S. forces on the ground, but regional partners. As for a timeline on when Hamas will be forced to disarm, Vice President J.D. Vance says it is hard to say, and that is because at this point, Hamas is not a unified group.
When you talk about Hamas, you're talking about 40 different cells. It's disjointed. Some of those cells will probably honor the ceasefire. Many of those cells, as we saw some evidence of today, will not.
Vance says we may have to wait for Gulf Arab states to enter Gaza with their forces and enforce law and order before making another estimate as to when Hamas will be disarmed. But Moshe, Hamas now being what J.D. Vance describes as 40 different cells. Can you walk us through exactly what that means and how this could ultimately play out?
So the number there is sort of a work in progress, but ultimately what we're talking about here is Hamas pre-October 7th was a organized terror group, the second biggest, second most powerful, second richest terror group in the region behind Hezbollah, which has also been destroyed in parts during this war. But Hamas had a leadership structure, they had a command and control structure, they had various battalions and units, special forces, pretty similar in some ways to militaries for countries. But over the course of the last 2 years during this war, the Israelis have effectively, eliminated all the leaders, the vast majority of the terrorist group. And what's left really are a bunch of fighters, including a bunch of new recruits, Palestinians who live in Gaza, who are like, you know what, I'm joining this war. I've lost everything anyway during this war. I'm in. So now you have a bunch of individuals, no real command and control structure, no real leadership structure. So you have, 200 guys over here in this part of Gaza who are like, we're Hamas. And you got another 500 guys over here who are like, we're Hamas. Another 1,000 guys over here who are like, we're Hamas. But no real centralized leadership, sort of a shared interest in fighting the Israelis, but ultimately no real organization there. And that's what you've heard here from, Hamas officials is we can't, organize everybody at this juncture. So even the incident that took place over the weekend that sort of led to the breakdown of the ceasefire, a Hamas group or Hamas aligned group allegedly firing at Israeli troops, then the Israelis responding to that group, Hamas core, Hamas Central, whatever you want to call them, is like, we can't control all these people and we can't get them all to agree to give up their weapons. And so we're going to see how this unfolds here because, ultimately this is not dissimilar from what we saw with, for example, Al-Qaeda. After 9/11, Al-Qaeda pre 9/11, you got Osama bin Laden, you got al-Zawahiri, you got, his leadership structure in Afghanistan. They planned the 9/11 attacks. Well, the U.S. quickly, starts to destroy their command and control structure, arrests a whole bunch of people. Obviously, bin Laden's on the run for a while, but in the aftermath of that, Al-Qaeda really can't function as a central group. So you start to see these regional affiliates, Al-Qaeda of Iraq, Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb, Al-Qaeda of North Africa, Al-Qaeda of Syria, Al-Qaeda. Everyone's an Al-Qaeda. But ultimately, there's no central headquarters. And then even that Al-Qaeda of Iraq becomes ISIS. And then another group that becomes ISIS but doesn't want to be part of that, ultimately ISIS, continues to be an Al-Qaeda of the Levant, Al-Qaeda of Syria. Now, by the way, the leader of that group is now the leader of Syria, right? He eventually was able to take out Assad last year. But nonetheless, the point of this all is, well, what we've seen before is that when you take off the head of a terrorist group, it sprouts more heads. And then you have a lot of individual smaller groups to manage. And that appears to be the situation we are in today in Gaza. Now, ultimately, the U.S. says, the Gulf Arab states, they're going to put in forces. We're going to see what that looks like. That's not a role that the folks at the UAE and the Qataris and the Saudis and others have been used to or ever done in a successful way in the past. The Israelis don't want to be involved, nor do the Palestinians want the Israelis involved. And so ultimately, who is the central force that gets into Gaza and starts to say, guys, time to give up your weapons? Because remember, the core mission of Hamas, if you read their charter from the 1980s, which is still in effect, is we are an armed resistance that will completely destroy Israel and replace it with an Islamic Palestine, part of an armed resistance globally. We are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's core to their identity. The idea that the disarming has struck people as like sort of hard to believe. So, that's one of the things that we're going to be watching here is even if, Hamas Central, what's left of it, does it, will the rest of the people who associate with Hamas or associate with resistance want to partake in that? And if they don't, do they just come up with a new name for their groups, right? There's a lot of these family gangs inside Gaza already. You already have Islamic Jihad. You have various smaller splinter factions that have developed over time. And will you see basically, well, Hamas isn't good fighting the fight, so we're starting, a new group, and we're going to call ourselves X. And we didn't sign on to that agreement. And that's something that has observers fearing that we're never going to quite get through phase 2 of the ceasefire deal as we watch what unfolds there.
Okay, time for the speed read, starting with a legal win for the White House as they continue their push to deploy the National Guard in several American cities. From the New York Times, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled Monday that the Trump administration can move forward with deploying National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon. So this ruling opens the door to some federal troops being stationed at an ICE facility in South Portland that had been the site of street protests since June. The ruling lifted a temporary block on the deployment of Oregon and California National Guard soldiers by lower court judge Karen Immergut. So remember, she was actually appointed to the bench by Trump, and she said that this National Guard order was likely unconstitutional. The latest ruling came from 2 other Trump appointees, 2 judges in a 3-judge appellate court panel, Judge Ryan Nelson and Judge Bridget Bade. One of the judges, a Clinton appointee, dissented. The Ninth Circuit Court judges writing, quote, after considering the record at this preliminary stage, we conclude that it is likely that the president lawfully exercised his statutory authority.
So that is the 3-judge panel of the appeals court. The way the federal system works is you get a district court judge, and then often you'll get a panel of the appeals court, in this case, 3 judges. And then the next appeal, which presumably, if by the time we wake up hasn't been filed, it'll be filed at some point today, will either be to the full appeals court panel, of 11 judges or straight to the Supreme Court. So there's potentially 2 more rounds here of appeals. And it comes as there are multiple cases playing out, right? There's the LA, California National Guard case. There's the Chicago National Guard case. There's the DC National Guard case, and potentially more here. And typically what the Supreme Court does is resolve disagreements between the various courts. And you've seen here, at least as we're watching this routing through in the Oregon case, the district court rule against Trump, the appeals court now ruling for Trump. Now we'll see what the full panel does, and we'll see what the Supreme Court does. We'll watch how the Chicago case is unfolding. That's a case, too, where the district court judge ruled against Trump, and the appeals court is showing more of a middle ground there between Trump and the folks who are suing from the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. Trump has some options as well. If ultimately the full appeals court, the Supreme Court, goes against him, he could invoke the Insurrection Act. We've been talking about that. That's a law from the early 1800s that he believes gives him the authority to circumvent a court order and deploy the National Guard regardless. But then, of course, that would also be subject to a whole bunch of lawsuits still that would end up at the Supreme Court. So there's a lot here that we're monitoring. But interesting that we saw now the appeals court overrule the district court judge. And now we will continue to watch it go through the courts. One important factor they cited is that while in Chicago, even amidst the protests, the ICE facility has been able to remain open, in Portland, at times due to the protests, the facilities had to close. And that's what the 2 Trump judges on the appeals court cited as the reason that they believe that a couple hundred National Guard troops makes sense to keep that facility open.
Okay, that is some insight into that meeting last week between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House, which reportedly erupted into a shouting match. From the Financial Times, President Trump urged Zelensky to accept Russia's terms for ending its war in a volatile White House meeting. warning that Putin had said that he would, quote, destroy Ukraine if it did not agree. The meeting between the U.S. and the Ukrainian presidents descended many times into a shouting match, with Trump, quote, cursing all the time. People familiar with the matter said Trump tossed aside maps of the front line in Ukraine. He said he was sick of seeing the map of the front line again and again. He said, I don't even know where this is. I have never been there. He also reportedly insisted that Zelensky surrender the entire Donbas region to Putin. And he echoed talking points that the Russian leader had made in their call the day prior. Although Trump did later endorse a freeze of the current front lines, the contentious meeting appears to reflect Trump's shifting position on the war.
Yeah, we saw him in this administration so far come in with a, like, let's give Putin what he wants and end this thing. That didn't work out. Then he started to shift very anti-Putin in recent months, going so far as to consider sending Tomahawk offensive missiles to the Ukrainians. That was the subject of the conversation at the White House on Friday that appears behind closed doors to have then gone south. Remember, Trump spoke just before the Zelensky meeting to Putin to schedule that Hungary meeting. So it appears that was top of mind for Trump as he was talking to Zelensky. There's a lot of different reports here from what took place inside the meeting, Jill. It appears to have gone on for a while. And again, had Trump throwing out ideas or trying to push Zelensky to, okay, let's just concede to Putin here. And then ultimately, it sounds like, based on what Trump said before cameras on Monday and late on Sunday, that, he does agree with sort of freezing the battle line, not having Ukraine give up more territory again. But, this goes back and forth. We're cutting aid off. We're giving them more weapons. Right? This is all part of his sort of weave, so to speak. He refers to the way he talks as a weave, but it's also sort of his policy here when it comes to dealing with Ukraine and Russia, which he has said multiple times. He thought this would be easy to take care of. Remember, he said he was going to get this done in 24 hours. Well, we are now, 9+ months into negotiations here. And it appears, we continue to go back and forth here. And we're going to see what unfolds in the coming days and weeks, what that Budapest summit might look like, especially given that the Alaska meeting, the last meeting between Trump and Putin, didn't go very well.
Now to where things actually stand in terms of a possible ceasefire. Putin made a new offer to Trump on Thursday in which Ukraine would surrender the parts of the eastern Donbas region under its control in exchange for some smaller areas near the southern front line that he has taken from them.
Yeah, this is basically Putin being like, I took a bunch of your territory. I control about 20% of your country. I'd like you to surrender more of your country in exchange for part of your country back. And this has all been a non-starter for Zelensky, especially as he wants a commitment from the West and from Vladimir Putin that if he is willing to give up parts of Ukraine permanently to Russia, that he wants a guarantee that this is not going to happen again and Russia's not going to come back at him in just a couple of years.
From the Mo News Instagram, the Secret Service found a hunting stand, or kind of like a high platform, in a tree on Thursday near the Palm Beach International Airport, which had a sight line of where President Trump exits Air Force One. The discovery comes amid multiple recent sniper-style assassination attempts of prominent figures. That stand was found during a security sweep, and it was positioned across the street from where private planes park, notably where Air Force One has been stopping recently because of construction. President Trump flew down to West Palm Beach on Friday. FBI Director Kash Patel announced via X that the FBI was investigating the suspicious stand, noting that there were no people found near it. Dan Bongino, who's the FBI deputy director, told Fox News on Monday that officials within the organization were concerned and taking appropriate action.
This hunting stand was appropriately dismantled, it's being flown to our lab. I believe it's there right now. And all of the forensic tools we have, from digital tools to biometric tools, they are all going to be applied to try to find out who put this up there and why.
So based on senior law enforcement officials, they believe the hunting stand has been there for a while. Hunters will regularly set up stands in trees. They're often used by bow hunters in dense wooded areas and can be used for people hunting with firearms as well. But this is particularly concerning, especially given that the last two attempts on Trump's life happened to take place from folks setting up in sniper positions, right? The shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, he was on a rooftop. The attempt on Trump's life in Florida last year was a guy trying to set up a sniping position actually on the ground outside his golf course. But of course, the way Charlie Kirk was killed, another sniper position on a rooftop. We've also seen attempts on ICE officers from rooftops. So again, the idea that you're, trying to kill someone from a high up position, nothing new, right? That's been going on for a very long time, but appears especially in light of this climate of political violence we're experiencing. That's one of the reasons they saw that there was a sight line to Air Force One when it's based in Florida and wanted to address it immediately.
From CBS News, police say they prevented a possible mass shooting at the Atlanta airport thanks to the hard work of multiple officers and a call from the suspected gunman's family. At a press conference on Monday, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens said that a Cartersville man who was having a mental health crisis drove to the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with a semi-automatic weapon in his truck. Dickens said 27 or more lives could have been lost today. The suspect is identified as 49-year-old Billy Joe Cagle. He appeared at the airport shortly after 9 a.m. So that morning, the Cartersville police say they got a call from his family reporting that he said during a live stream that he was headed to the airport to, quote, shoot it up. Officers found Cagle's Chevy truck parked outside of the airport at the South Terminal. In the back seat, they found a Springfield AR-15 assault rifle and 27 rounds of ammunition.
Quick action here by both the family and law enforcement. After they received the alert about him and a photo of him and his description, they found him walking inside the South Terminal over there at Atlanta Hartsfield Airport. They believe he was scouting the area before he planned to return to his truck and collect his weapon. In body camera footage, Cagle apparently told officers that he had been dropped off at the airport and was just here. But ultimately, they know that he drove his truck to the airport, left it in an area, blocking other traffic. So they got him into custody in about 15 minutes after receiving information from Cartersville law enforcement. And so authorities in Atlanta thanking the family for helping avert what could have been a tragedy. Today is how things should work, one official said. Community law enforcement, dedicated men and women wearing the uniform and trained to respond when their community needs them. He is now charged with terroristic threats, criminal attempt to commit aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, possession of a firearm by a felon, a whole number of felonies there, Jill, but quick action by the family, thankfully.
To some health news now from PBS. Food allergies in children dropped sharply in the years after new guidelines encouraged parents to introduce infants to peanuts, according to a new study. For decades, as food allergy rates climbed, experts recommended that parents avoid exposing their infants to common allergens. But then there was this landmark trial in 2015, which found that feeding peanuts to babies could actually cut their chances of developing an allergy by over 80%. In 2017, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases formally recommended the early introduction approach and issued national guidelines. The new study was published Monday in the journal Pediatrics, and it found that food allergy rates in children under 3 fell after those guidelines were put in place, dropping to 0.93% between 2017 and 2020. From 1.46% between 2012 and 2015. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a 36% reduction in all food allergies, driven largely by a 43% drop in peanut allergies. The study also found that eggs overtook peanuts as the number one food allergen in young children.
Still, the data is pretty promising here. Food allergies can be dangerous, and about 80% of people never outgrow food allergies. Scientists don't fully understand what causes all food allergies, but some believe that higher rates of C-section deliveries, early childhood exposure to antibiotics, other issues like our highly sanitized environments could play a role here. So scientists have been developing a working picture of how allergies might develop. Allergens first encountered through the skin, especially through broken or inflamed skin, can prompt the immune system to mistaken them for threats. So, one thing they often talk about, Jill, I've heard from pediatricians, is especially when you start solids for your baby, to have them wear a smock and not have too much skin contact or any skin contact with certain foods. That's one of the concerns there around allergens. But there is increasing evidence here that exposing kids to a whole variety of things very early on does prevent allergies down the road, especially when it comes to peanut allergies. There's a snack called Bombas out of Israel. It's one of the most popular kid snacks. And there's versions of it. Trader Joe's has it, these sort of peanut puffs. And they're extremely popular in Israel. And it's seen as one of the reasons why the country sees very few cases of peanut allergies, because kids are eating those peanut puffs at a very young age. And so that's been one of the suggestions I've heard. And these newest national guidelines established just a couple of years ago recommend not just the peanut introduction, but introducing several common food allergens to all infants between 4 to 6 months of age. We're talking about a small bite of scrambled eggs, in addition to a pea-sized smear of peanut butter that can help train an infant's immune system.
And finally, some tech news from TechCrunch and the New York Times. Spotify is partnering with Netflix to bring its video podcasts to the streaming service starting next year. Spotify says that initially the partnership will bring a curated selection of sports, culture, lifestyle, and true crime podcasts from Spotify Studios and The Ringer to Netflix. This deal prevents those shows from airing in their entirety on YouTube, which is Netflix's biggest competitor. Beginning in early 2026, audiences in the US will be able to watch full video versions of those 16 shows. It includes the Bill Simmons podcast, The Rewatchables, Dissect, and true crime series like Conspiracy Theories and Serial Killers. Over time, the deal will see Spotify adding more podcasts from other studios and genres. This move follows Spotify's increased focus on video podcasts, starting with the launch of tools that make it possible for anyone to publish their shows as videos. Over the past year, the company added incentives that pay podcast hosts for their popular videos, and it also launched a partner program so that hosts could monetize their video content. Again, this is a direct challenge to YouTube.
Yeah, we've been in touch with Spotify on that front, full disclosure, Jill, though, since we sell, as you guys all listen to this podcast, we sell our own ads. We wanted to continue to be able to manage our fate here when it comes to monetization and ad sales. And that's been one of the requirements Spotify has made of partners, is that sort of managing the ads for you and taking a significant percentage of the ad sales. So we'll wait to hear more on what they do to incentivize more of us to be involved in this program. But one of the ways in which people are taking in podcasts is through video. Watching them on YouTube, Jill, we've been seeing increasing reach of our podcast, of this podcast, on YouTube, as well as the clips that we place nearly daily on the Instagram page. TikTok is another place people are engaging with podcasts right now. So no surprise here that Netflix wants to get in the game here, continue to find ways to keep people on the platform. So you're not just waiting for, season 3 of The Diplomat to come out on Netflix, that you're seeing this day-to-day content or this weekly content coming from podcasts here. So it's interesting because, Spotify's had to do a couple pivots here. We were sort of at peak podcast just a couple years ago. And then there was sort of this realization that these big 9-figure deals they were paying out to people like the Obamas and others, Meghan Markle and others, were not worthwhile. So you're certainly seeing the podcast industry, including how Spotify's approaching podcasts, continue to change here. And just to give you a sense of the numbers right now, Spotify says it currently has 430,000 video podcasts on its service, and video consumption is growing 20 times faster than audio-only consumption over the course of the past year. So we here on the Mo News podcast, if you watch the YouTube page, we're working on our lighting, on our backdrops. I have a fake tree in the background. Jill has a fake tree in the background. Trying to make it pretty for all of you. Or is that a real tree, Jill?
I was going to say, how do you know it's a fake tree? No, it is a fake tree. And I am still tweaking this backdrop, Moshe. I'm on the hunt for a good bookshelf that will fit in this space.
Bookshelf. I got a bookshelf behind me. Jill, I can say some bookshelf ideas. Once Amazon Web Services is back up.
Yeah, minor problem.
You can navigate for a new bookshelf. All right, now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1520, 505 years ago today, Ferdinand Magellan and his crew discovered the gateway to circumnavigating the globe. Magellan had one goal: to sail around the world. And so he took off from Spain with 3 ships and made his way, sort of following in the footsteps of Columbus, west. He would go down around South America, and on this day, he would discover the strait in between the tip of South America and Antarctica that would allow him into the Pacific Ocean. That strait today, Jill, is called the Strait of Magellan, naturally. Now, poor Magellan, he would not make it around the world. He would eventually die in a battle in the Philippines, but one of his surviving ships eventually makes it around India, then around Africa, and back to Spain. And so the mission would end up being successful, though he would not be there to complete it. On this day in 1833, Alfred Nobel, you might have heard of him, he was born. On this day, he would go on to invent dynamite and other explosives, and then in his latter years say, I'm going to actually create a peace prize.
I don't want to be known as the guy who invented
as the dynamite guy. and by the way, that probably worked out for him, right? 99% of people would probably be like, what do you know about Nobel? And they're like, oh, the peace prize, not the invention of dynamite, which he did before he gave all his money for the peace prize. All right, some of you might have gotten our clue at the top. In musical history, on this day in 1964, My Fair Lady, starring Rex Harrison and Audrey Hepburn, makes its world premiere. It would go on to win 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain. Jill, among the various phrases that they use to try to teach Eliza Doolittle to speak proper English. Jill, it's a play that's close to my heart because I was in my high school performance of it. And by in the performance, I mean I was...
In the chorus?
No, not even. I was in the stage crew. I built the sets for that.
That counts.
It counts.
Yes.
I'm building the crew.
You
building
were
the staircase.
part of the team.
The fake bookshelf is part of the professor's library. And a couple other pop culture items on this day in 1957. Jailhouse Rock by Elvis Presley goes to number 1, turning 68 years old today. On this day in 1980, Bruce Springsteen releases Hungry Heart. And on this day in 2022, just 3 years ago, today, Midnight's, Taylor Swift's 10th album, is released. Among its famous lines, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
It kind of works for everything.
And
AWS, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem.
That's Amazon. Me. Yeah, like go through all the stories and just figure out who needs to be saying that.
All right. Thank you guys for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See you, everybody.
This is Leah. Thank you for listening for Mo Pocket with Mom and Dia.